Yeah, I'm Tom Mierzwa. I teach at the University of Maryland, and I teach courses in innovation and entrepreneurship, and I try to use a technique for teaching that really gets people to respond to ideas and concepts. When you consider the idea of balancing structure with creativity in dealing with a problem, or my approach is really to try and do a balance of the two. It's not either or, but it's you have to have a certain amount of structure in order to be creative. I think you can't start out with a base of creativity. I think you have to start out with some framework of structure, and then within that framework you can be creative and inventive and come up with innovative ideas within that framework. But in order for the idea to be creative, I believe you have to frame it within something that is structured. I think finding an opportunity through association is really a challenge, and I think it's a challenge for everybody. And I think a better way to do that, or people who can do that a better way, do that because they have a certain amount of experience, and they can make that association based on the experiences that they've had. So people who don't have a good experience base in something, a good, let's say even a professional experience base in something, or an association experience base, then they can't make those connections. And so I would say anybody who wants to grow their ability to make associations is to connect with a lot of things, read a lot of things, and have an inventory of ideas and things that you can make associations with. When I think about finding the best opportunities for innovation, it really depends on where the person is in their profession, what their background is. People who have a marketing background, I think, would find innovation opportunities in the marketplace. People who have an engineering or a technology background, I think, would find their innovation opportunities in the strength of finding those innovation opportunities within the technology itself, because they would know about that technology and they'd know how it worked and they'd know how it might be applied. And so the creativity that enters into that, just like the three components of creativity, you have to have some motivation, you have to have some professional expertise, and you have to actually be able to then make an association between a creative interpretation of what a problem is and a creative interpretation of what, let's say, what a technology could do for that problem. I think barriers to innovation really, I think, are embedded in an organization's culture. And if you can create a culture that is a context for people to be creative and to be innovative, and there's always the discussion about rewarding innovation and not punishing failure. I mean, those are fundamental things, but I think it's the idea that innovation and creativity are acknowledged, and acknowledged because they're acknowledged not just necessarily from the top down, but they're acknowledged in across the organization itself. And so what you have is a feeling of comfort and strength and risk that comes naturally once that acceptability of failure and the acceptability and support for innovation occurs in an organization's culture. I think when you face failure, you really have to understand failure first. I think that's first and foremost what happens. People often fight the idea of recognizing why something failed. And so it's a very analytical process. You have to understand what the causes of the failure were and what the influences were, and perhaps even some of the pathways of least resistance to overcoming that failure might be. So, as an example, somebody might have had a failed experiment, and that maybe was something that was counted upon as leading to an innovation. And so it was a failed experiment, but you understand why it was failed, and you kind of then re-examine why that happened, and you redo the experiment, or you redo the hypothesis about why that happened. And so it's really a rediscovery of why something happened, as opposed to, beating your head against the wall trying to overcome failure. It's really, failure is a natural part of the innovation process. And by learning from failure and learning from other people's failures. And so that learning process happens not just within yourself, but it happens in the interaction with other people and how they can explain what they have failed upon. And you learn from that as well. Well, being an entrepreneur is not determined by a test. Being an entrepreneur or becoming an entrepreneur is really a growth process. And part of that growth is really having the perseverance to grow and having the ability to look at ways in which you can grow as an individual, ways in which you can grow your idea, ways in which you can grow support for your idea. And that support would be from colleagues, from people you're working with, or from venture capitalists, from really many, many different sources. And so growing the ability to be an entrepreneur is obviously it's a skill, but it's also perseverance. I think if I looked at one single thing, you wouldn't find yourself even considering being an entrepreneur if you didn't have the interest. And so the interest is part of what would drive you. But then going from that and persevering and sustaining that interest is what keeps you going and keeps you growing and keeps you expanding your ability to be a better entrepreneur as you go forward. Nobody starts out knowing everything there is to be an entrepreneur. You grow from some point at starting point.